sixth year, from buildings completed between January 1990 and March 1993. Now, this has been something of a lean time for architects, so we sent one of them, Piers Gough, on the road to see how his profession has responded to the current recession and to nominate his own choice of Building of the Year.
The RIBA regional award winners represent the best of what's being built in Britain. What the list reveals is that there are more public buildings in recent years. Schools, libraries, a train station and a car park. But with the glaring omission of housing and significantly fewer office buildings. No prizes for guessing why that is. Recession. So what do architects build in a recession, apart from much less, obviously? How does it influence them and their clients' aspirations of what is built? Is it just a case of leaner and meaner, or is it more caring and sharing? To find out, I'm cruising the cream of this year's crop, and the first stop is Epsom in Surrey.
Baby, you can't catch me, 'cause if you get too close, you know I'm gone like a cool breeze.
The Queen's stand at Epsom Racecourse on the South Downs is at the finishing post of the Derby. The building seems to look back to the modern movement of the early 20th century, when architecture was more idealistic. Richard Horden is an ex-Norman Foster high-tech architect with a passion for yachting. And it's this interest which is evident in the building's technology, but it's even more clearly displayed in the imagery, which evokes the luxurious, ocean-going liners of the 1930s. Ever since Le Corbusier, the boat has been the strongest of modernist icons, the autonomous, self-sufficient object floating in the landscape. Here, the image is a good fit for its use. After all, decks do make good viewing balconies. The yacht theme is carried through in the detailing, at the edges of the floor and roofs, and in the fabulous soaring flagpoles. The building houses commentators and judges at the top, private boxes including the Queen's in the middle, and jockeys' weighing rooms below. The multifunctions of the building are effortlessly organized with elegant circulation from one part to another, as with this yin-yang oval staircase. The materials are sumptuous but understated. Nearly everything is white, the heroic modernist colour, and quite appropriate here. Going back to modernism is attractive to some of today's architects because it had a strong social agenda, certainty and coherence, unlike the plurality we've seen in recent years. This is a reaction to the extravagance identified with the high-tech and postmodernist 80s, the era of Terry Farrell's Embankment Place and Richard Rogers Lloyd's building, big, confident statements. The response has been to go for a more restrained approach. The architect feels obliged to show humility rather than displaying architectural brio. Architects have traded in their 80s shoulder pads for old woolly sweaters. These are, after all, the 90s. Let's see what the most famous Foster alumnus is up to.
Now I'm looking at the world through a windshield, and I see everything in a little bit different light.
Here at Shad, Thames, right behind the Design Museum in the Bermondsey part of London's Docklands, Michael Hopkins goes back even further than Horden's version of early modernism for his inspiration. This building, originally designed for the cutlery guru David Mellor, combines a high-tech look with the older, richer vocabularies of the arts and crafts movement. At first sight, it may look like a classic exercise in high-tech building, with exposed structure and separate lift tower, but it's not. It's virtually handmade. It's clad in panels of raw lead, hand-beaten in Mellor's cutlery factory. Even the concrete frame was painstakingly hand-sanded by Mellor and his staff to produce the softest, sweetest concrete, as smooth for the touch as the proverbial baby's bottom. How lovely to have a literally hands-on client. Hopkins practically invented this strategy of using natural materials to give a softer image to technology. The steel enclosure of the lift and stair tower is flanged outwards to show its raw, elemental qualities, giving the building an attenuated, elongated form. The building has a nice urbane mix of shop showroom on the ground floor, adding to the life of the street, offices on the upper floors, and a maisonette at the top. From front to back, it is quite transparent, and the whole appears like a nicely wrapped jewel box. Whereas postmodernism plundered, too often coarsely, the more sophisticated high styles of classicism, Renaissance, Baroque and Gothic, the new architecture looks back to the prosaic and simpler styles of the past, of which modernism was just one. Arts and crafts another, vernacular another, and going back and back to the most primitive of structures. To follow this particular trend backwards, I'm heading for Abingdon.
Of old LA. Yeah, and down that old Pacific shore, I swing north and run for Baltimore, somewhere about 2,000 miles away.
The Milton Business Park is intended to give kind of permanence, confidence and stability to the young start-up businesses that share these buildings. The way it's achieved is to put them around a comforting quadrangle come stable yard and build it out of friendly vernacular materials like brick and oak and put a pitched roof on it to create the kind of environment that the public seemingly has an unending appetite for. What you get is a hybrid that takes this traditional genre and subjects it to a modernist sensibility. The architect is probably a closet modernist who might prefer to be doing the white stuff if only given the opportunity. So the detailing is strong, refined, and beautifully executed, if a little quirky. The roof opening over the balcony may be stylish, but it's distinctly perverse for a staircase to be open to the elements. The total effect is of the earnest, idealized simplicity of the farmyard, crossed with the pallor of a ghost. It's what I call the new anemia. Unfortunately, it's not an isolated case. So prevalent is the bleaching tendency that not only in this building, but in all the other award winners that have steel structures, the steel is painted white. It's not so much a trend as a whitewash. Other architects simply use these vernacular elements with straight-faced conviction. It must be indicative of this headlong drive towards primitivism that not only do many of them look rustic, but that half the awards are for one-story buildings. It's as if civilization had gone back to the hut. Perhaps it is reasonable for primary schools. Certainly the schools pioneered by Hampshire county architects always get awards. In this year of natural materials, they have gone more rustic and primitive at the Woodlea primary school. It's more like an encampment of huts in a school. In the age of the national curriculum, we seem to prefer to rear children in surroundings as similar as possible to sheep. But the Woodlea school looks positively urbane in comparison with Hook Park College in Dorset. The client was John Makepeace, maker of fabulous furniture, who set up a design school to study the uses of green woodland thinnings, an environmentally friendly, renewable resource. The technique was implemented here, not for bentwood furniture, but for bentwood buildings. Although the jointing is technologically state-of-the-art, pushing spans and joinery to the limit of this most natural of natural materials, the result resembles nothing so much as a primitive shed lashed together by a smart tribe of hippies. Who says architecture isn't getting back to its roots? Literally. We're off to Yorkshire, where getting back to basics reaches an almost archaeological level.
Traveling light, I just can't wait to be with my baby tonight. No comb, no toothbrush.
The movement to ultimate retro is brought to its most sophisticated and elegant manifestation at Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire. Here at Fountains Abbey and Studley Royal Estate, the remains of a 12th century Cistercian abbey became the centrepiece of an 18th century romantic landscape garden. It is the National Trust's most popular property. 300,000 people a year tramp its elaborate series of walks. At first glance, what looks like the oldest building on the estate is in fact the newest. Ted Cullinan has designed an inventive visitors centre to handle the crowds. Once again, the conceit of a humble stable yard is created by an enclosure of single-storey, pitched roof buildings. However, here the elements of the building keep breaking out of the mould. Roofs part to let other roofs through, which end in a flourish towards the estate. The outer elevations are of very natural materials: dry stone walls, untreated timber, slate and lead roofs. Cullinan's use of unjointed dry stone walls is in fact a very clever exploitation of modern construction. The outside wall is just a rain screen and need not be impervious because the inner wall does the job for it. With its thick chunks of untreated wood and club-handled waterspouts, the exterior is completely Flintstones. Future archaeologists might be forgiven for thinking that the basic unit of measurement in the late 20th century was the boulder. Inside, it's a slightly softer story. There is the ubiquitous white-painted steel, clerestory windows, and double-curved ceiling. To round the whole thing off, there is the irresistibly cosy neo-primitivism, the Inglenook stove. Cullinan pulls off this risky game of retro by his sheer exuberance. The building elements are allowed to take on a life of their own. He's a virtuoso, playing with almost ecstatic conviction. The main signs are of architects swinging away from a flamboyant 80s image. They're in tough times and are assuming a humbler, softer stance, reflecting succour and shelter for their clients. What Ted Cullinan has done at Fountains Abbey may be just right to win the RIBA prize, but what does it say about the state of the nation's architecture when the top award in the UK might go to a visitors' centre for a heritage site? Some of the greatest architecture of the 20th century has been inspired by the past, but today's buildings shouldn't depend solely on the desiccation of modernism or the faux naivety of vernacular. It would be good to think that after this transition period that the RIBA list represents, the 90s could find a stronger voice of its own. Maybe next year we'll see a resurgence of confidence, sophistication, and please, some colour. Meanwhile, if I were president of the RIBA, I would pick Horden's Epsom grandstand because of the immaculate way it works and its consummate, unfussed, sheer beauty.
Fuel consumption way too fast. Let's get on home before we run out of gas. Now you can't catch me. No, baby, you can't catch me.
Piers Gough, who it turned out disagreed with the RIBA's choice. It later named the Woodlea Primary School in Hampshire as its Building of the Year.